Good day, everyone. We are the Group 9 and we will discuss two topics, which are the Chapter 3, Lesson 4, Utilitarianism, and Chapter 3, Lesson 5, Justice and Fairness, Promoting the Common Good. Together with me are my members, Nicole Jeremy Caodor, Sheda Marie Vinkley de Tarot, Lovely Queen Hucho, Honey Girl Payanan, and yours truly, Saber de la Cruz. So first, let's discuss Chapter 3, Lesson 4, Utilitarianism. What to expect? If an act benefits a lot of people, even though some may suffer as a consequence, was it a moral act? Explore the ethical theory of utilitarianism, founded by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to articulate what utilitarianism is, critique utilitarianism, and make use of utilitarianism in a practical way. Jeremy Bentham is known as the founder of utilitarianism. He was born in 1748 in London to a father who was a prosperous lawyer at that time. He was sent to school at the age of 7 in Westminster School, then graduated from the Queen's College, Oxford at 15. He was expected to follow in his father's footsteps as a lawyer, but he did not. His famous works related to moral philosophy are Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation and a fragment on government. What led him to believe in the theory of utility is after he read the book of David Hume on the treatise of human nature. Now, what framework should we use in making an ethical decision? The third ethical framework you will be introduced is the utilitarianism of Jeremy Bentham. This framework focuses on happiness as the barometer of right morality through the calculation of more pleasure produced over pain. Origins and nature of theory. You are familiar with our great national heroes Dr. Jose Rizal and Andres Bonifacio. We have learned from our history subjects that they did not die for nothing, but offered their lives for igniting the spirit of liberty and independence among their fellow Filipinos. It was done by the followers of Jesus Christ, their master and teacher, who died on the cross as an offering for the forgiveness of mankind's sin and their salvation. The point of their death is clear. For the sake of the people's liberty, independence, and forgiveness of their sins, they have their end or telos in offering their lives. The theory of utilitarianism, sometimes called consequentialism, focuses on the effect of a particular end or telos called happiness. The first to propose the idea is David Hume, a philosopher during the modern period, but the ones who have made the idea more depth and made it more profound were Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. It is enough for us to deal with Jeremy Bentham and his classical utilitarianism. He is also considered as the founder of utilitarianism. The classical version of utilitarianism as formulated by Bentham can be summed up into 3 points. First is, the basis for an act to be treated as morally right or wrong is in its consequence. It is known as consequentialism. What is there in the consequence that makes it morally right? It is only when there is the presence of happiness. In short, happiness is the key in determining the morality of the act. It is the end or telos of every act. That is to produce happiness. The second point is what matters in every act that we do would be the amount of pleasure produced. One must not forget the element of happiness in assessing the morality of the act. If there is no pleasure yielded, then the act is morally wrong. Happiness is comparative. That is, there will be greater happiness, and greatest happiness. Likewise, there also will be greater pain, and greatest pain. If there are multiple acts that can produce a variety and different degrees of happiness, which act is right? In the theory of utility of Bentham, the greatest happiness produced should be chosen over the others. How do we determine the greatest happiness over the other greater and great happiness? Bentham uses the philosophic calculus, a method that can calculate or measure happiness and pain. The third point, which is the happiness experienced by every person, counts the same. It means that every person's happiness is taken into account and no one is left behind. How are we going to use such a method? Bentham is a hedonist and he understands happiness as pleasure. This pleasure has a partner which is pain. He believes that the world is governed by these two principles. It follows that human beings are inclined more on achieving happiness in as much as we possible avoid what is painful. Now, to measure happiness or pleasure, all we need to do is to count all the happiness or pleasure that an act brings minus the amount of pain that an act will also bring. If the amount of happiness or pleasure is greater than pain, then the act is good. Amount of pleasure minus the amount of pain is equals to moral or immoral act. Furthermore, one has to consider in assessing an act. The following factors are: first, happiness or pleasure should be more intense. Second, happiness or pleasure should last longer. Third, happiness or pleasure should be more certain to occur. Fourth, happiness or pleasure should be happening sooner rather than later. Fifth, happiness or pleasure will produce in turn many happiness and few pains. And lastly, sixth, in determining the amount of happiness or pleasure, one has to consider how many people will be affected. The better position would be when there are more people affected positively. That is, greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, and fewer affected negatively. Thus, right actions are those that produce the greatest possible balance of happiness over unhappiness, with each person's happiness counted as equally important. We speak of right action as determined by the result of the act. In Thomistic ethics, moral act is determined by right action. The downside of the philosophic calculus is not in the method per se. It is in the assignment of the object being measured. There are objects easily measurable since they are concrete. But how about those objects that are immeasurable such as love and friendship? For sure, there is no apparatus intended to measure them.
Chapter 3, Lesson 4, Utilitarianism.
In the field of business, ethical considerations are paramount alongside economic and legal viewpoints. This report explores the role of utilitarianism, an ethical theory developed by Jeremy Bentham. In the corporate world, utilitarianism focuses on maximizing overall happiness and minimizing pain in society. This report will discuss the application of utilitarianism in business decisions and highlight its importance. So, utilitarianism in business. Utilitarianism is used by managers to assess the consequences of corporate activities on all stakeholders, including employees, consumers, producers, and the public. The core principle is the greatest good for the greatest number. Utilitarianism emphasizes the importance of extending pleasure and reducing pain across the entire population. So what it means is utilitarianism is an ethical theory that focuses on evaluating actions and decisions based on their overall consequences for the well-being and happiness of all affected individuals. In the context of corporate activities and management, it means that managers use this framework to consider how their decisions impact various stakeholders, such as employees, consumers, producers, and the general public. The core principle of utilitarianism, which is the greatest good for the greatest number, implies that managers should aim to maximize to the overall benefit of pleasure while minimizing harm or pain for the most people possible. In other words, they should make choices that leads to the greatest net positive impact on well-being. This ethical approach emphasizes the importance of spreading happiness and reducing suffering throughout the entire population rather than favoring the interests of a select few. It encourages managers to take into account the diverse needs and concerns of all stakeholders and strive for decisions that create the most significant positive outcomes for society as a whole. So let us now proceed to philosophic calculus. Utilitarianism employs the concept of philosophic calculus to evaluate the extent of pleasure and pain. This calculus, however, faces challenges. It requires measuring pleasures and pain in terms of quantity and quality, which is imprecise and lacks reliable instruments. Managers often resort to educated guesses and past experiences to make these assignments. So what it means is that utilitarianism uses specific calculus to assess pleasure and pain, but it's challenging because measuring these experiences precisely is subjective and lacks reliable tools. So managers often rely on intuition, and past knowledge to make these judgments. Now, let's on to cost-benefit analysis. To address the limitation to philosophic calculus, economists often use cost-benefit analysis. This method quantifies benefits and drawbacks in monetary terms. If the benefits outweigh the cost, the decision is considered a source of pleasure. If not, it's seen as a source of pain. Cost-benefit analysis is commonly applied in business decision and public policy matters. So, cost-benefit analysis quantifies pros and cons in money terms. If benefits exceed costs, it's considered positive, otherwise it's negative. It's widely used in business and public policy decisions. So, the important is that utilitarianism and cost-benefit analysis are crucial in business decision-making because they aim to achieve the best possible outcomes for society as a whole. They guide managers and policy makers to make choices that maximize overall welfare and minimize harm. However, challenges persist in assessing intangible values such as human life, which some argue should not be reduced to monetary terms.
So, hello everyone. I am Shada Marvinkli H. Utarat, and I'll be discussing about Chapter 3, Lesson 5, Justice and Fairness Promoting the Common Good. So, what to expect? How will you know that your decision was just and fair? First, you need to understand how some philosophers view justice and fairness. Later on, you should be able to critique justice and fairness and make use of this in your real life setting. John Rawls. John Rawls is one of the important political philosophers during the 20th century. His main work is a theory of justice, published in 1971. This work addressed some of the social issues, especially in the name of justice, between the state and the citizens and among the citizens. He received his academic training at Princeton University, and later part of his career, he became a philosophy professor at Harvard University. Rawls proposed justice as fairness as an ethical framework. This framework focuses on how justice should be distributed that would yield fairness for those who have more and those who have less. The term fairness refers not to equality but on equity. There are different definitions of justice, just as there are different thinkers in their respective field of specialization. Plato defines justice as harmony, where the three groups of people in the society working together for a common goal. The justice of Rawls embraces not only sociological dimension, but includes political and socio-economic as well. In fact, for Rawls, he understands justice where there is fairness among members of the society with the goal of promoting their common good. So there are two principles are as followed. First, each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive scheme of equal, basic liberties compatible with a similar scheme of liberties for others. Second, social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are both A. reasonable expected to be to everyone's advantage, and B. attached to positions and offices open to all. Rawls speaks of fairness in terms of equality and equity. He acknowledges that there are certain just distributions that are governed by existing principles. The first principle is called the principle of equality. In this principle, Rawls claims that every member of the society should have equal rights and liberties. These rights and liberties refer to the political condition of every citizen. The second principle is called the principle of difference. In this principle, Rawls acknowledged that there cannot be distribution in the society in terms of socioeconomic goods because of unequal socioeconomic status among members of society. He highlights that these inequalities should benefit the least advantaged members of society, and that opportunities be given through employments. These two principles are not independent from each other. The second principle shapes the decision making of the political constitution, while the first principle is most of the time influenced by the socio-economic institution.
So next, the nature of the theory. A common view about a just society is that every member treats each other in a just way. We want to treat others justly and we want others to treat us exactly the same way too. John Rawls has in mind an ideal and just society where there is justice, but in different philosophical nuances. By the way, for Rawls, justice is the first virtue of social institution, and therefore it is expected that he would always think of society exercising justice. So how did Rawls expose the idea of a just society? He understands justice as the fairness. His idea is different from that of Plato, in which the latter speaks of justice as every member of the society acts harmoniously according to assigned roles. Rawls' justice is very much emphasized in taking into consideration the interests of every member of the society. Before he speaks about what is a just society, he would first lay the foundation of a social order. Just like any political philosophers, he would consider order as first thing first. He would talk about social order where there are rules and sanctions that put social affairs into places. He would underscore that rules in social order should be construed as our moral obligation to obey. Rules are there for us to obey and follow for the sake of our social order. The question that comes to mind about rules, since we have a biased mind that rules are impartial, is: are the rules implemented can accommodate all people without discrimination? So Rawls formulate an idea of original position. What is this all about? Rawls has his theories beginning in the original position. He wants to put things in place where it creates a favorable condition for justice to exist. It is an imaginary idea to speak about this position, but it is important and the basis of justifying his belief. The world situation is unjust. When one thinks of unjust rules, he endorses the anonymity condition and rejects the moral relevance of threat advantage. These two elements, when it observes well, would result to justice as fairness. The two elements can be summed into what he calls the veil of ignorance. Why he needs to endorse the anonymity condition? It is because we cannot but doubt that rules are created with partiality. In this anonymity condition, one knows nothing about the particular individual each represents, about that citizen's gender, skin, color, natural endowments, temperament, interests, tastes, and references. Due to the veiled ignorance, it creates a just condition where there is no threat advantage to anyone. So therefore, everyone is seen from the point of view of fairness. So if one wants to accept a social order that is just, then see to it that the object of agreement is fair. That is, that social order takes into account the interests of all members of such society equality. This is the barometer of where justice is fairness prevails.
So next is distributive justice. Distributive justice. There are different theories of justice, and the rules speak of justice as distributive. The meaning of distributive justice is that everyone in society has to share both the burden and the benefit of whatever the society offers. If one enjoys the benefits offered to them, one has also accept the burden. Nobody enjoys only benefits without taking the burden, or purely burden without taking the benefit. What is the content of benefit and burden? This can be answered depending on the following kinds of society: egalitarian, capitalist, and socialist. Egalitarian distributive justice. As egalitarian, one is concerned with a just distribution in terms of receiving an equal share. There are two kinds of distributive justice under egalitarianism on the level of state or governmental distributions. The first is political egalitarianism, where legal rights of every citizen are equally observed. For instance, in the exercise of the right to suffrage, it is only intended for the few citizens. Every citizen of the country should have the right to choose who is his or her political candidate should be given the powers to govern them. The second is economic egalitarianism, where the distribution of socioeconomic goods are equally observed. The socioeconomic goods refer to those basic necessities like primary food, clothing, and shelter that would enable each citizen to have and live a decent life. Another example of equal treatment of all citizens from economic egalitarianism is the establishment of the minimum wage law. Every employee is entitled to a just wage in terms of the lowest possible wage they can receive from doing legal work according to the law as agreed upon by the government and the private employers. Capitalist distributive justice. As capitalists, one is concerned with a just distribution in terms of receiving one's share according to how much one contributes to the overall success of the goals of the institution where one is employed. The term proportion is useful here. One receives one's share according to the proportion of one's contribution. If one contributes more, one receives more. If one contributes less, the less one receives. This is a working student who shares his experience being a library staff during his vacant time. He receives his salary or the allowance according to the number of hours rendered, and for every hour he is paid 20. If he decides to be on duty for 4 hours, he receives 80. If 6 hours, he receives 120. If 2 hours, then 40 pesos. That is an example of distributive justice according to the mindset of the capitalist. Socialist distributive justice. As socialists, one is concerned with a just distribution in terms of one's needs. We have various needs in life, and if we want to achieve those needs, we need to work hard according to the amount of needs we have. If one has greater needs, then one expects that his share is greater in the distribution scheme, and vice versa. This view of distributive justice would seek to level the playing field of every member of the society where all of them have natural inequalities. These inequalities refers to those inequalities in our initial endowments in life. One has the natural talent of singing that others do not have. One has the genes of being intelligent that others do not have. One is born into an affluent family who owns a big hacienda in a province, and so you can have all the latest gadgets, the best school to choose to study, and many others you need to make all your wishes and desires happen in just one request. Consequently, from the natural inequalities, the disadvantaged cannot really compete with those advantaged. In order to get that kind of share, the socialist justice would emphasize the kind of work that is based on the one's natural talents. If one has the talent for singing, one has to be employed as singer. If one has the talent for public relation, one has to be in a PRO office. According to this mindset, this kind of work from one's talent is fulfilling and humanizing. This mindset is part of idea from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs of Karl Marx. No alienation and dehumanization will take place. If one wants to receive according to the proportion of one's needs, one has to get the proceeds of utilizing in full use of one's talents. These setups correct the natural inequalities.
And next, the state and citizens. Responsibilities to each other, the principles of taxation and inclusive growth. We all exist under a particular state like the Philippines, and the state has the power to collect taxes from its citizens. As it citizens, we have the obligation to support its existence through monetary contribution. It's stated in the 1987 Constitution, Article Local Government, Section V, that each local government unit shall have the power to create its own source of revenues and to levy taxes, fees, and charges subject to such guidelines and limitations as the Congress may provide, consistent with the basic policy of local autonomy. Such taxes, fees, and charges shall accrue exclusively to the local governments. The state possesses inherent powers wherein the government can issue commands for the survival of the people, and at the same time maintain order and peace in the land. One of the inherent powers is the taxation power, and the other powers are police and eminent domain. The reason why the state possesses such power is to let the people contribute monetarily in order to support the cause of the government, its existence, and its other projects for the betterment of the whole populace. This power to tax the people, together with the amount to collect, is amended and improved by the legislative body that is composed of lawmakers and is executed by the executive branch.
Taxation is grounded in two fundamental aspects: necessity and reciprocal duties. Necessity dictates that the government must collect funds from its population to support its existence and cover operational expenses. The government's functionality relies on the monetary aspects. Reciprocal duty stems from the concept of rights and duties, emphasizing the responsibility shared between the state and its citizens. While the definition of rights and duties are diverse, they ultimately revolve around the mutual obligation to protect and uphold each other's rights. So, what it means is that taxation is based on two key principles, that is, necessity and reciprocal duties. So, necessity means that the government needs to collect money from the population to operate effectively, while the reciprocal duties are about to share responsibility between government and its citizens to protect and uphold each other's rights. Even though the definition of these rights and duties may vary, it's a mutual obligation to support each other in maintaining a just and functioning society. As recipient of benefits provided by the state, citizens have a responsibility to contribute to the government's finances through taxes. This contribution ensures the smooth execution of social and physical projects, strengthening the state's existence. Taxes collected from the public are considered public funds, earmarked for public needs, including infrastructure development, healthcare, education, security, and the advancements of various sectors for the welfare of the general public. This underscores the need for mutual cooperation between the states and its citizens in the taxation process. So, citizens have duty to pay taxes because it helps the government provide essential services and maintain the state. Taxes fund public projects like infrastructure, healthcare, and education, emphasizing the cooperation between citizens and the government for the common good. So let us now proceed to the controversy of the benefits received principles. The benefits received principle posits that citizens pay taxes in exchange for the benefits and services offered by the government. However, this principle is not without complexities, particularly when considering direct and indirect taxes. Direct taxes such as income tax are deducted from the individuals, while indirect taxes level on businesses ultimately impact consumers. This creates a nuanced economic situation where the burden of indirect taxes is shared between the sellers and buyers, necessitating a fair distribution of the tax burden. One of the core challenges pertains to the disparities between the amount of tax paid and the benefits received. High-income individuals who make substantial income tax contributions may not directly receive benefits proportional to their payments. Further disparities arise when individuals who evade taxes or pay them dishonestly. This inequality raises concerns about the concept of fair play in taxation, creating intricacies in the taxation system. The benefits received principle suggests that taxes are paid in exchange for government service. However, complexities arise due to direct and indirect taxes, leading to disparities in the relationship between tax payment and benefits received. High-income individuals may not see proportional benefits, and tax evasion adds to these inequalities, raising questions about fairness and taxation.
The rule of economics and inclusive growth. So now let us get familiarized with the basic concept of economics. Economics is focused on the scarce resources that every member of the society is facing. The role of the economist is to come up with a plan on how to produce and abundantly so that can enjoy and benefit from it. There are different economic models to product scarce resources. For some years, economists have made some evaluation in the model that most countries use and recommended that such economic growth does not ensure prosperity for all. This prosperity for all means that economic growth should be felt and scaled down from the macro level to micro level. In the traditional economic growth, the usual method is on the growing of the pie, and the distribution of the pie to the people comes later. The pie simply means the national income, but that is not the usual case happens. We have the common knowledge that the lion's share for the pie is usually being enjoyed by the few, and the remaining share is distributed to the many. This is an example of inequality in economic growth. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, whose mission is to provide policies that will improve the economic and social well-being of people around the world. The wealthiest, that consists of 1%, holds 19 of the wealth, while the 40% of the poor only holds 3% of the wealth. It means to say that the rich people enjoy the resources more than the poor people. The common reaction of the ordinary people is, I only enjoy small amount or quality of the growth. How much worse for others say, I didn't feel the growth anyway. Inequality exists and persists in such condition. The solution to the defects of traditional economic growth is inclusive growth. What does it mean by this phrase?
The goal of every economic growth is to increase the production of source resource so that every people well-being shall be sustained. This happens only when the resources are well distributed from the macro level, which is the economic growth from regional, national and international level, down to micro level, which is economic growth from the personal level that addresses aspirations, capabilities, productiveness, and opportunities. In short, economic growth under inclusive growth must create opportunities for all people in different levels of the societies, and the resource distributed to them accordingly. The term opportunity does not only mean monetary values, but also non monetary values as well. If economic growth is limited to the macro level, then that is exclusive growth. In order to achieve growth, the role of taxation is of utmost importance. And that ends our topic. Thank you so much for listening.